Hi pals, it's me, RT, they them pronouns only. Whilst the heat wave has mostly passed, it is still very warm and I will be melting throughout the whole of this video because it's got a long script. This week's video is the one that I've been kind of talking about on and off for a little while. That could be literally any video. Well done RT, thank you very much for not being specific. This video is the queer analysis of the first 2 seasons of Skins. I've had some basic notes for this ready for a while, but I did sit down and kind of re-jig it and reword it quite a bit because I saw this posted recently and I shared it and explained that I have been wanting to kind of talk about at least the queerness in general of Skins, but Tony is obviously a main player in this as well in particular, and that itself kind of made me want to narrow down some of my thoughts and change the structure a little bit to kind of also have a particular focus on the vague bisexual representation. Also, it's Bisexual Visibility Month, September. Hello, you can see me this month. Although to be fair, I feel like I'm visible every month because I've got either so many marginalised identities or conditions. I'm visible all year round. But yeah, when I shared the post, there were actually quite a few likes compared to my tweets usually. I decided that we really gotta just get on it. So this video is talking about queerness in the first generation of Skins. I will be referencing a few parts of Vineet Mehta's book Bisexual Men Exist, as he wrote a really fun and very interesting section on bisexual representation in media. Yeah, quite early on in that book. I will leave a link in the description where you can buy a copy of his book as well. Also, it's an affiliate link, so you will also be supporting me if you buy that book too, because I have like an affiliate thing going on with the bookshop site. So also, I don't have my physical copy with me at the moment because ironically I lent it to a bisexual man. So I had to ask him to photo and send me the pages that I'm referencing. I'm not sure if I will keep in verbal referencing or whether I might just list some of the pages and stuff in the description as well. Okay, so yeah, the queer shit that is the Skins first generation. Canonically, by self-identification, Maxi is the only queer character in the main friendship group. Maxi himself has a lot of plot points, especially linked to his sexuality in season 1 and 2, and then not really a lot else goes on. Season 1, we are introduced to Maxi initially practicing tap dancing whilst Tony is ringing him to come to a party, but he can't as he's got a boys' night out with Anwar and Chris to the local gay pub that night. Considering the kind of nightlife that queer people have in real life, all over the UK, probably all over the world, but like UK particularly in this circumstance, Maxi's gay pub is pretty subpar. It is shown as like quite a cringe and boring event with only like a handful of quite a bit older gay men, probably like 40s upwards, listening to like pretty typical gay queen style 80s pop music, which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just painting the picture of the kind of representation they've already started out with. And Anwar and Chris find it hard to be enthusiastic. I personally think that they might have had a better time if they'd gone to a gay club, which has a lot more similarities to the kinds of clubs and parties that they go to throughout the first 2 seasons of the Skins universe, what the fuck ever. You know, the same kind of like dance music, drugs, probably some bi women hanging out that they could hook up with, some straight cis allies. You know, you get the gist. I think they would have had more of a good time if they'd gone to a club versus this kind of old man pub. I think the pub was also just a pub. It wasn't a gay pub. It just had like a gay night, I think, but That's me speculating, I don't remember specifically. Generally, Maxi doesn't get the same amount of screen time for his romantic or sexual relationships compared to the other heterosexual cast, as we never really get to see him actively fall in love with somebody or have the same kind of long-standing narrative around his sexual exploits or dating debacles like the others. In Sid's episode, which is episode 5 of season 1, Tony walks in on Sid having not knocked before entering the room, and there's an awkward silence before Tony announces he's going to leave and come back in again and pretend that this never happened. He does this and knocks, and this time comes back in saying, "I thought you could use a hand with your coursework." And I feel like that's a fun little hint to some more Tony related plotline later on in the episode specifically, but also generally in this particular season. Tony invites Sid to his choir concert with Michelle as part of a grand plan that Tony has. The gist is Tony kisses another girl on stage during this choir concert under the guise it's just a performance, and he's caught with his hand up her top backstage checking her diaphragm, which leads to Michelle dumping him and running off, also angry with Sid because Sid must have known about it, and they both get beaten up by some girls in the street. This leads to Sid wanting to apologise to Michelle as he didn't know about Tony's plan and it wasn't his fault. All the while, Tony has been egging Sid on to make his move on Michelle whilst he can, now that they aren't together. Michelle meets Sid at a bar at God knows what o'clock. It looks like middle of the day. They are underage, ordering alcoholic drinks. This happens a lot in Skins. You're just like, okay. And they both have matching black eyes from being beaten up by these girls. They make up and start dancing at the bar. Question mark for me. Then Tony arrives and he comes over and says he's been a bit silly and joins in a 3-way dance. Sid tries to leave, but Tony keeps a hold of his wrist and pulls him back in tight to watch Tony and Michelle kiss. Not gonna lie, a little bit gay. A little bit bisexual energy there. Yeah, I think it's the next episode. The class takes a history trip to Russia. This is sort of Maxi's first more leading role in the narrative. The arc is basically entirely around his sexuality being a problem. The first part is Anwar, canonically Maxi's best friend, might be homophobic. Anwar has an erection on the flight and Maxi is joking with him about it. In a way that friends do, but Anwar immediately responds with, "All right, gay boy." Whilst this is more mild and kind of the kind of exchange that's kind of common among friendship groups, particularly in this friendship group, it's the setup to the rest of the episode and prolonging arc in the season. There's also a line that Maxi says when it's made known that Sid has been used as kind of the drug mule for the trip. Maxi exclaims, "Oh no, not up his arse," which I think adds to the canonical background of Maxi always having to accept and make somewhat homophobic jokes to be accepted or to be palatable to his straight friends. A little later in the episode, Anwar is looking through Maxi's sketchbook and sees he drew the two of them. Maxi said he could keep the drawing, and as he removes it from the sketch pad, and I think Maxi is left by this point as well, Anwar sees Maxi has drawn some guys like stuff. And for some reason, Anwar is convinced it's a drawing of him. And this is kind of where the homophobia really develops in the plot line. I also just have to throw in here, Anwar tells the group about seeing a hot Russian girl chopping logs outside by going like, "I've seen boobs." And one of the girls, I think it was Michelle, says she's got a chopper as well, which is not a super fun innuendo about trans women. Woo! And this is pretty much the only time trans people are like acknowledged at all. I'm gonna go with this season, but I think just generally through Skins. But if that changes, I'll mention that up in like other videos when I talk about different generations. In another scene of just Anwar and Maxi, they plan to share a room on this trip. Maxi asks, are we going out on the pool? And Anwar says, just don't bring anyone back, okay? And Maxi's just very confused and tries to joke about it, but Anwar is being really serious and says he doesn't want to see that. Maxi asks, could I bring a girl back? I could, couldn't I? And Anwar says, well, have you tried? And Maxi just immediately comes back with, have you tried being with a man? And Anwar goes, no, that's sick. And Maxi asks, you're calling me sick? And he says, no, I don't know. I don't know what I think. Yeah, I'm just a Muslim. Gay is just wrong. And then Maxi says, then you don't want anything to do with me. Maxi leaves and swaps beds with Sid at Tony's demand. So Maxi is now sharing with Tony. Maxi tells Tony about everything with Anwar, and Tony says, shall I give you head? Maxi's really upset by this, obviously, because he just wanted to talk to friends. He just wanted to talk to a friend about what's going on with his best friend, and he's propositioned instead. And then Tony tries to kiss him, which makes Maxi sort of duck and shout like, what the fuck, I'm not a hobby, Tony, you're not taking up canoeing here. And Tony just goes, no, I've been canoeing. And Maxi asks, what about Michelle? And then Tony takes off his shirt and is just waiting, but then Michelle comes in and wants alone time with Tony, so Maxi leaves. Anwar, no, same. Yeah, Anwar tries to pretend nothing happened. And Maxi just says, just take it back. Take back what you said. But he doesn't, so it continues. Tony wants Maxi to draw him, but he's also being very overtly sexual and suggestive about it. I'll give you head. That's friendship, he says. Maxi runs off and catches Anwar trying to help Sid get drugs, so he shouts at him for being a hypocrite. The Russian lady, who is like, I don't know whether she's like a landlord or like a host or something, but like the Russian lady who owns the place, lives in the place, manages the place, whatever, comes out to shout at Maxi, but he cries and she notices he's wearing a Neil Diamond t-shirt. And she loves Neil Diamond, so she brings him to her little room to hang out. She gives him just straight vodka, which he drinks like it's water. And then Maxi is sharing with this old lady about everything that's happened as he draws her in like a funny little lingerie set. Anwar is then sharing what happened between him and Maxi with this Russian girl that he was talking about earlier, and said that Maxi was mad because he told the truth and that's important. For one, there's one way of telling the truth without being inconsiderate and mean, but also I would say that the truth he is telling is subjective. I wouldn't necessarily say that that was an objective truth he was saying, so he's just trying to make himself feel better. Maxi tried to save Anwar when all of this fallout then happens towards the end of the episode, where Anwar slept with that young woman. Anwar agrees he's a hypocrite and decides to lean more into Muslim tradition and to stop drinking, taking drugs, etc. Where does that leave us, Maxi asks. Tony then tries it on with a very drunk Maxi, who got drunk because he was upset about everything with Anwar, whilst his girlfriend is also passed out in his bed in the same room because she also got drunk. So this is sort of the most sex scene we really get for Maxi in the whole generation that he was in. But he also stops it and says, Tony, I think we've actually found something you're not very good at. And then leaves, and Tony is shocked, and Michelle saw everything happen. Then there's a fallout from all this in the next episode when they're all back home. Maxi tries to talk to Michelle to explain and apologise, and he admits in front of the whole class what happened with Tony because he feels awful for a start. So we're going to have a bit more discussion around Tony and his kind of queer representation of this season in particular. He encompasses a lot of bi-man tropes in media. A lot of what I'm talking about will be referencing Vineet Mehta's book Bisexual Men Exist. Tony is like any character who shows indication of being attracted to more than one gender, but were either left ambiguous or forced to be gay or straight. And using the Ramirez test, as seen in the book, we can analyse Tony as a bisexual character. Is the character recognisable as a bisexual within the media itself? By bi people, sure. Is the character's bisexuality presented as a joke or a flaw? Yes, it's definitely presented as a flaw. And the last question is, does the character call themselves bisexual or any other NSPEC identity label? No. I would say this puts Tony in the ambiguously bi trope quite safely, whilst he is shown to have interest in more than one gender, and does so at the same time as, you know, he dates or has these experiences at the same time as dating women. We only really see this with one guy and kind of some maybe a lot vaguer experiences with another guy versus a lot of girls. It isn't exactly clear whether he has a genuine interest and attraction or if it's just because he can, which moves into the trope of just an experiment and the depraved bisexual trope. The just an experiment trope shows that there could appear to be an attraction to the same gender or appear to be MSpec, only for the character to move on from it rather quickly and it never really come up again, which definitely happens in this show. As I mentioned before, we don't really see Tony have interest in any other men in the two seasons he stars in. It is then used as the butt of jokes or reasons why his attraction to other women isn't valid, because don't worry, he fucks everyone, even guys, Michelle says to Abigail at one point. This also gives the character of Michelle full reign to be MSpec and homophobic during this, and puts much of the blame on Maxie, who rejected Tony and stopped the interaction with Tony because he was thinking of Michelle. And then when it comes to the depraved bisexual trope, it's where a character is presented somewhat bisexually because, hey, we might as well. It gives more drama, more plot point options. If you haven't seen my previous video on this generation talking about the disability representation, this part is quite relevant and links to what I said in that video about Tony as well. The depraved bisexual trope usually goes hand in hand with the character being manipulative and willing to do anything to achieve their goals. He is portrayed as literally just does anything because he can. Everything he does is for his own entertainment, to keep things interesting, to test the boundaries of his friends and test their loyalty, not because he genuinely loves or is attracted to them, or that can be assumed as such. Tony at the time of Skins airing would have been the only MSpec representation many people had, but especially men and boys. This adds to the idea that bisexuals, especially bi men, are only using sex for sex and are cheaters. We see no internal conflict with Tony around this, just more concern that his plan didn't really work out. Tony's character embodies a lot of Casanova tropes as well. He is known to be the smooth-talking and charismatic one of the group. He can talk his way into and out of anything. He doesn't sleep with just anyone. There are parameters, but he does sleep with a lot of people, majority women, with desirable traits or social standing, whilst also attempting to sleep with certain men or manipulating them with an implied sexual gratification, like Maxie and Sid. Maxie is deemed one of the more desirable men in the group, so Tony is more interested in adding Maxie as a notch to his bedpost, whereas Sid is not seen as particularly desirable, but he is a lot easier for Tony to control and is a much more loyal without question, whereas Maxie usually stands his ground a lot more regularly and more firmly than Sid does until a lot further down this generation. And then things don't really get bi-curious again in Skins until season 2 with Cassie, with similar themes as I flagged already here, but I will detail those a bit more later when it comes up. And also, to be clear, I don't deem or dub Tony and Cassie's plots or representation as bad bisexual representation by any means. Much like what Vineet says in his book, as well as others he references, being bisexual does not make all bisexual people the same. We don't know if others are necessarily reading Tony or Cassie as bisexual. We don't know if they are even being read as like negative when they do these bisexual things. These portrayals of MSpec identities are very much realistic, as is the good kind of bisexual representation, like in Heartstopper with Nick, for example. They are just different representations of people, and I went into more detail as to why I think Tony and Cassie act this way in my Disability Skins video. So you kind of watch them both as a pair to kind of get more of an understanding overall of everything. Back to the plot for some context for a while before further queer analysis. Michelle tries to hook up with Sid and ends up crying whilst both partly undressed, and then Sid's dad comes in and sees them. When he leaves, he rings Sid's mum and is happily announcing that Sid isn't gay. Right. Whilst I love Mark, that sucks. In the final episode of season 1, Effie starts private school. We see everyone is in their beds as a reminder that this is a collective group with interweaving stories. It's Anwar's birthday and Max rings him to say happy birthday. Anwar asks if he'll come to his birthday party, and Maxie asks if Anwar is going to tell his family that Maxie's gay. Maxie won't go to the party unless Anwar's family knows and are okay with it. Sid goes to the madhouse to visit Cassie and doesn't explain things very well, so they end up locking him up in there for a while. Angie's ex-fiance Merv, which also when I was typing this, Merv was auto-corrected to Serve, which I think is such a gay move. What a Serve. Anyway, he is very queer-coded. I mentioned that a little bit in the disability video, so I'll talk a bit more now. The way he speaks is very camp, the way he holds himself, his outfits, body language, all of that sort of thing. And also Chris just straight up says this man is gay, so I think it was on purpose. I just think that's an interesting choice made for this character who's kind of just like a random add-in towards the end of the season to add some drama or confusion between Angie and Chris. And also that he's one of the villains pretty much. And also I just also think it's really interesting and funny that they chose an Australian or like someone to do an Australian accent. They made a lot of choices with this character. Michelle visits Effie at her school to check on her. Effie has school on Saturdays now, and Michelle asks Effie why she doesn't speak and then just starts talking about Tony. Anwar's dad said that he would rather keep his wife's brother in the DJ booth, even though no one likes the music, because then it prevents him from sexually harassing any of the women at the party. Chris decides Merv is gay from watching him being a weatherman. Yeah, he's obviously very queer-coded. Anwar wants Max to see the girl he's been hooking up with. Anwar's dad comes outside when Anwar's talking to Maxie, and they both tell him that Maxie is gay, and his dad just responds with, there's a little bit of like a mini monologue here, but the main important line is, I know one day he, God, will make me understand. Basically, it's a very precious moment that both helps to correct some of the stigma around Muslims all being homophobic, as well as gives Anwar a new point of view on his religion, upbringing and culture, showing that he can combine that world with his social friendship world too. Then Cassie turns up to the party. After Tony made Sid go in to find her, Tony and Cassie talk for a bit. He gives her the letter that Sid wrote but abandoned on his like bedroom side. Then I just have the questions of like, why is Merv at Anwar's birthday? Oh yeah, it's because Chris fucking lifted the engagement ring. Then there's that whole cringe moment of, oh, I've dropped it on the floor. And he looks like he's proposing to Angie. And then Merv and his gay mates all start fighting these literal children. And yes, all of his mates are gay. They turn up looking very much like Grease or Flashdance extras in their like white vests. Skin tight white vests. It's ridiculous. Tony gets out of the car to talk to Michelle on the phone. He rings her. She's inside in the bathroom crying. He ends up in the road because signal's bad. That's when he gets run over by a bus when he's genuinely apologising. Again, more on that in my disability analysis video. Then the famous singing sequence happens. The campest shit. And then we also see everyone who hooked up with somebody at Anwar's party. Anwar and the girl he was talking about, Jal and Kenneth, and Max and one of the adult friends of Merv. this is something that comes up a lot in this season in a subtextual way, is that Maxie is only really seen around older gay men as a 16 to 17-year-old, which can both be shown as the isolation of queer teens, especially at the time of this show coming out, and at the negative stigmas of older gay men being seen as predatory, and the normalisation of underage queers being in adult queer spaces, which was also historically an issue. It's been shown in films like Pride as well, that with the stigma around queerness, there often wasn't a space for young queers to be around other young queers, so they got into adult queer spaces, particularly when they haven't always been so heavily monitored like they might be more so today. And then we're finally into season 2. This is a little bit more of a shorter analysis because less happens, basically, that's relevant to the queer analysis. So again, we're introduced to Maxie at the beginning of this season with a dancing sequence, which I've only just put that together, that both times he's been introduced is when he's dancing, but then you barely see him dance. Yeah, like haven't really seen this in a while. I don't think you see him dance really at all, except both the starts of both seasons and then at one point a bit later in this season where he's dancing on the roof of his building. Yeah, whilst we don't generally get to see a lot of Maxie in most episodes, this season does give him a little bit more of a narrative space to work with outside of just being the gay one. We see Tony is in the room watching and he is disabled and in need of much more support. Max's mum used to clean Tony's family home, so we get a bit more of a working class representation. He lives in a flat in the estate and his dad is a builder. Maxie's stalker is also living on the estate too. Her name was Sketch. Other rough lads on the estate being homophobic at Maxie. And then there's just the random phrase that Maxie's dad says, is that he's going to slay them at the regionals because he does dog competitions. And I just thought it was funny in retrospect, when slay has been quite a well-known, well-used word among queer people generally, even though I know it comes from AAVE, black queer spaces. So but I just thought that was a little bit funny to reflect on, that the dad of the gay kid says things like slay. Maxie wants to go to London to audition for musicals as a dancer, but his dad wants him to get his A-levels and then work with him as a builder. Even though he is very accepting of his son being gay and defends him, he is quite strict on this thing in particular. Cassie moved to Scotland. I don't know why. And she's got a couple of gay Scottish friends that she hangs out with all the time. Effie takes Tony to this party that everyone's going to, and he immediately cannot take the rave, all the people, music, lights, noise, etc. Maxie tries to help him but ends up outside alone with the estate lads chasing him. One of them catches him and starts kissing him. And Maxie says, "You can't just treat me like shit and then just fuck it." And this is kind of our first look at Maxie actually experiencing his own sort of sexual romantic plot, particularly with someone his own age. But again, we don't really see anything more than this. It's sidelined after this episode. We never actually see that particular guy ever again, and the focus is on his friend duties to Tony and his issues with his dad around his future. Maxie's dad comes round to what Maxie wants, but only if he finishes up his A-levels first. And he sort of explains that the reason why he was quite stuck on this was that he loves his son too much and doesn't really want to see him leave, which is quite sweet. I think the one thing is quite nice about the rare bit of marginalised representation, at least in this season, is that they actually do have very loving, kind and accepting parents. You know, the example of Anwar's dad, but also his mum. I didn't really talk about her that much because it's not relevant to the things I've been talking about. But also, yeah, Maxie's parents are very loving and accepting of him being gay, which is a nice change of pace. Sometimes it's just a lot of trauma porn everywhere all the time, including family stuff, and it's just like, I need a break, please. Now we're on to Maxie's stalker. Sketch is another ambiguously queer character in Skins. She uses a more gender-neutral name around her friends in college, Sketch versus Lucy, but she acts and behaves much like a trans person. Her personal style leans more masculine, she binds her chest, She doesn't really wear much makeup and is in love or obsessed with a gay man, which would make sense if she did ID as a trans man or trans masc person. None of that language is ever used in this show. She's still referred to as a girl with feminine language and pronouns, and still has longish hair and uses girly hair clips. Max notices a flash from a window where Sketch has taken a photo of him. She's been lying to her mum about Max being her boyfriend. Bet you don't want to introduce him to the scary disabled mother, and she has MS. Again, more on their dynamic and relationship in the Disability Skins video. Sketch is the tech person in the show, so Maxie is the lead and Michelle is his love interest in the show, and then Sketch drops a massive light mid-kiss in rehearsal. There is a cast party, sort of, but also not, because it seems to be a Halloween fancy dress party hosted by the drama teacher who is groping all of these underage girls. Just fully assaulting people left, right and centre. Maxie tries to set Anwar up with Sketch, which is its own foreshadowing for later in the episode and season. Sketch literally breaks into Maxie's flat, looking at all of his stuff, gets naked, wears his shirt, gets into his bed and does that. Yeah, I just had some questions in this section, similarly to what I said earlier about Tony, is as a viewer, there's a lot of ways you can interpret this situation. You know, my own interpretation could have been that maybe she is trans, but also I wrote the questions of, she dresses boyishly, is this because she knows he's gay and is hoping he will fall for it anyway? Or does she like to present like this generally, that she's maybe more of like a masc woman? Or is she transcoded? Max comes in and she has to hide under his bed. He sleeps naked, so that's a whole ordeal, and she has to stay there all night. She goes back to her mum, who has fallen and has wet herself on the floor and been there probably all night. Sketch pretends that the director assaulted her and they both report him. And I'm like, I mean, go off. He was assaulting people, just not Sketch. And then she's in a boyish outfit in that scene. Michelle talks to her and is really nice to her about this whole assault. She did it to ruin the play, but it didn't work. So Sketch lost a hair clip when she broke into Maxie's room, because Michelle invited Sketch to come over and hang out with Michelle and her friends. Max sees the hair clip and is like, I recognise that hair clip, that was on my bedroom floor. I personally made a note that I felt like this was a really weak plot point, because if you managed to lose a hair clip whilst you were breaking into somebody's house, why would you wear it the next day at school or at college? So I just think it was just for convenience of the plot, honestly. He does go to find her, and this is another point I made in the other video, is he just knows where she lives, apparently, even though they don't really know each other at all. But he has an interaction over the intercom with her mum, who has fallen out of her seat, and she tells him all the stuff that Sketch has told her, and now they both know that Sketch has been lying to and about them. Her mum calls her out and realises the drama teacher was also a lie. She says, I didn't bring you up to be a liar. You didn't bring me up at all, you fucking disabled slur that I talk more about in detail in the other video. Sketch drugs Michelle before a performance, so she's puking too much and Sketch can take the role instead. She's in this cute little suit rather than the really femme outfit that Michelle had. She is convinced that kissing Maxie in the play will make him realise he is in love with her. So when that moment does happen, he whispers in her ear in the middle of the show, like, see, I still felt nothing. Then she has this massive outburst and embarrasses herself in front of basically the whole college, like parents, staff, whoever it is that's turned up to see this show. She comes home, unties her mum, takes the binding off of her chest, puts on a dress, and then goes to sleep with Anwar because he's a terrible friend, easily manipulated, easily swayed teenage boy. This also goes back to the trope of the depraved queer people, but more on the lines of gender presentation. So she's a masc presenting character because, hey, we don't have a masc woman here, and trans is too niche for this show, particularly during this year that it was going on. So she's portrayed similarly to Tony in that a lot of ways she changes her gender presentation to get what she wants, to manipulate someone and to use them as a pawn in her overall plan of getting to Maxi and getting him to realise he actually does want her, which is why the trans coding can also be debatable as well. From this point onwards, she's seen as much more unkind and vicious in personality, and we never really see any reference to her disabled mother ever again. So honestly, God knows who is taking care of that woman at home anymore. Sid turns up to Tony's house. He's on the front porch. Effie lets him in. Sid and Tony are having a fight over Michelle. Again, the history is that Sid is always the one who has to apologise to Tony, like when it's Tony who is mainly the problem. They did their silly little like friendship handshake, but Tony still walks off. Effie uses this moment to bribe Sid. If he does her coursework for art, she will sort out his fucking life. In another scene, we see Cassie is snogging a random girl at the flat that she's sharing with Chris, is having a gay moment. Cassie says to Effie, because she's trying to talk her into forgiving Sid, Cassie says, "Tell him I've discovered the power of the pussy," which I just think is so fucking funny. However, we then see her immediately swapping between sleeping with men and women, both in this episode, this scene alone, but also generally for a little while, all as her sexual partners only. She doesn't really have any romantic relations going on. Cassie's bisexuality definitely comes under Ambiguous, as she never states she's bi at all, but does show that she is sleeping with multiple women, but also is much more under the it's a phase / experiment trope, and a little of the anything that moves trope as well. This period of time in the show, Cassie is not interested in romantic relationships at all. Also a very valid bisexual representation. It is all for sex, which does make it sort of come under the anything that moves trope. Whilst this is just a phase or an experiment, because once it is rectified later in the episode where Sid and Cassie make up and get back together, it's never really mentioned or thought of ever again, even in the return of Cassie in like the remake episodes years later. And the reason why the representation of Tony and Cassie could be problematic and damaging to real bi people is mostly because they are not seen as long-standing bisexual characters. It's often just a blip for the plot and nothing is ever reflected on by these characters at all. There's also a massive skip here ahead because nothing gay happens for a while. Everyone's partners turn up to revision at college. This is like near the end of the season. Maxi's boyfriend, who we've never seen before, is just there. Like they're like boyfriends. We've never seen him ever. This is his introduction. I don't remember his name. The kid from the estate, yeah, like I said, gone. Never saw him again after that episode. There's no resolution or expansion for the relationship they did have. There's no kind of acknowledgement that it ended or whether it was just casual or not. The final episode of the season, where Chris has died and his dad doesn't want anyone at the funeral, Tony makes Sid go after Cassie to New York, and they have like a little gay BFF moment where you really see that Tony does love Sid, even kisses him on the forehead, which is like a very, very intimate gesture. We don't really see a lot of the men in this season really having any intimacy in that kind of way. So to me, it seems a little bit more gay, you know? Maybe there were some bi-feelies for Sid from Tony. And then Maxi at the end is leaving Bristol for London with his boyfriend. Anwar comes to say goodbye, but Maxi invites him to join them, and he just does. So that's kind of the run through of the seasons. The general thoughts of the queer tropes used. The canon gays have to be palatable and morally just, basically. We rarely see Maxi with boys, and if we do, it isn't as graphic as the hetties or the perceived hetties in this season. Same goes for Tony's experiences with Maxi and Sid, as well as Cassie's experiences with the women she sleeps with. They are very sanitized. We don't really see much of anything versus what we have or do see of the heterosexual pairings with their romantic sexual partners. And like, yeah, generally none of them have any gay romantic stuff happening at all. Anything gender weird is also bad. Sketch is evil. When she could be trans or non-binary going after Maxi, because, you know, sexuality is a lot more complex and nuanced than this description, but like for ease of discussion, she very well could have just been a gay trans man or like a gay mask non-binary person. Like, it would make sense. Yeah, the idea of evil bisexuals or being bisexual for the drama or revenge. Cassie becomes bi after Sid sleeps with Michelle and sleeps with as many people as possible all the time for weeks or even months, because we don't, the timeline's not super clear. After all that happens, because she's using it to get back at Sid, not necessarily because she's interested or attracted in women. Tony is bi when he's bored. Goes after Maxie when he has been upset and abandoned by his friends, Maxie's friend being homophobic. Tony is still dating Michelle. Is this seen as cheating in his head or not because it's the same gender? Is it kind of like the reverse version of straight men saying to bi women, you can't sleep with men, but I'm fine with it with women because I think it's sexy? Except it didn't work out that way for Tony, because Michelle got pissed about it. As a surface level analysis, Tony is doing it to use and hurt people. No one in this season is bisexual. It is all behaviour and actions, all about sex and control and inter-friendship group drama, but it can definitely be read into in a myriad of ways, as I've already gone through in this video. Right. So that was my general conclusion. I think one of the fun parts of media is that you can translate it and look at it and read into it in so many different ways, and also you can create your own headcanons for things. And that's completely fine and valid, and is probably sometimes the best we're ever going to get, because everyone's too afraid to give the more nuanced, complicated representation that most people are looking for. I feel like in a lot of ways this show can be quite good representation, because it's not a very sanitized representation. It's very messy. It's not very cut and dry. We don't know if they're bisexual or not. We don't know if they actually would identify in that way. We don't see Tony or Max again after these 2 seasons. We don't know what they've been up to. There's definitely some weird like gay shit kind of like in the vibes when Cassie returns with one of the girls who lives in her house. None of it's explicitly said, so it's all up for interpretation, which is good and bad. It's good because, yeah, a lot of people can just sort of decide how they feel about it, but it's also bad because then we never really have much named bisexual representation. I feel like this is something that does continue through the seasons, where a lot of the multi-gender attracted characters in Skins don't ever really say or name themselves that. I think there is one character, and that's in the 3rd generation. So when I get there, but yeah, not that people don't use more complicated labels than gay and straight, really. And yeah, like I said a million times, whilst a lot of people in real life, that's their experience and identification for themselves, I think it would be great if we could actually name more of these characters, or like label more of these characters with their identities, because maybe more people would be interested in using labels if they actually saw people who did and acted similarly to them using those labels as well. But hey, nothing's cut and dry, nothing's straightforward here. Everything is complicated. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if there's anything else you would like me to approach when it comes to the Skins series. Yeah, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share the video, all helps, algorithmic stuff, and helps me work towards the YouTube partner program thing, or what the fuck ever, it's whatever they call it. I'm getting pretty close to 1,000 subscribers, which is the minimum for the partner program, and then obviously it's a lot of the building up the watch time, which is so high. So if you have any spare time, watch a few of my videos, leave them on in the background. It all helps, thanks. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I have a few ideas what my next couple of videos will be, but I just don't know what order I'll put them out in, so either way, I will see you next week. Bye.